Never let the machine beat you. Just letting you know the live stream is getting ready to start, so it's going to start in a few seconds. And it looks like it's running.
Okay, Scott, you look like Elvis. Nice hair.
Okay. It.
Just got off the boat.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Jocelyn.
Oh,
Jocelyn.
How much sleep have you gotten in the last week, Jocelyn?
Oh, I took most of the week off. Just kidding.
He's not lying. I did it all.
How are you doing, Adrian?
What?
How are you doing? Yeah.
Good. Can't really complain.
Okay.
And, all right, it's
10. 2.
Scott is here. Do we have anybody else in the waiting room we need to invite and then kick
Yep.
out, or?
If
Okay.
you're ready for them, I'll let the phone numbers in. We have a few.
Okay.
And then I'll go ahead and start the recording. We're going to record this meeting?
Yes, please.
Okay. I'm going to let me let them in. And I'll go ahead and get the recording started. You are recording.
All right, great. I'm going to call the work session for the Northwood School Board for July 23rd, 2020 to order at 6:30 with a roll call. I'm Brian Winslow. Do you guys just want to introduce yourselves, or you want me to call you out?
Stephanie Arroyo.
Shirley Glennon.
Shane Wells.
Jessica Boudreau.
And the staff members, administration who are here, if you don't mind introducing yourselves.
Jocelyn Young, principal.
Adrian Hallford, assistant principal.
And we have Scott Rooting, the superintendent, who's muted at the moment.
Excuse my
Okay.
student. My name's Scott, superintendent of schools.
Great. We are broadcasting to the YouTube channel that can be found at sau44.org, as well as taking call-in listeners to this meeting. The purpose of the meeting is to go over the draft reopening plans, and I'm just going to turn this over to the administration at this point to lead us through that conversation.
Go ahead, Jocelyn.
All right. So, Mr. Robert, can you make it so that my screen can be shared?
Yes, give me 1 second. I'll do that for you right now.
And I've never done this before, so bear with me here.
I'm going to make one other statement. I forgot to say, because this is a work session, the school board will not be voting on these plans this evening. We're discussing them and maybe making suggestions, perhaps, but will not be voting. We'll also not be taking comments from the public. We won't have a public comment session. So just wanted to make sure that everyone who's watching along is aware of that.
Yeah, you're all set to share your screen.
Do you see a picture of the school?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yeah.
good. All right. Okay, so just a little introductory stuff. I just want to thank, oh, hold on. There we go. I just want to thank everybody who contributed to this. We did an enormous amount of work in a short amount of time. And also want to say there's still an enormous amount of work to be done. But, you know, Mr. Alford, Mrs. Sholin, Mr. Robert, Mr. Ballou, Mrs. Brewer, and Mr. Byrne and I all spent a lot of time together this week trying to get some preliminary recommendations down on paper for you. I have about 20 plus-ish slides to provide the broad strokes. There's certainly greater detail in the full-length document that you were sent a couple hours ago. And then there's still much more detailed planning that will need to occur. And that will really need to be done with the input of staff and participation of staff. This is not a plan that will be successful without their input. All right. So what I would suggest is that I just go through each slide, and then I think what we've tried hard to anticipate any questions that you may have. So we may not answer them immediately, but I suspect we'll answer a lot of the obvious ones somewhere during the presentation. So I would suggest that we save questions to the end. Moving on. So we used a variety of resources in the development of this plan. The Superintendent's Advisory Committee recommendations were featured prominently, CDC guidelines and recommendations, and then the document that the governor released a week and a half ago or so. As we went through the planning process, we kept three things firmly in mind: student and staff safety, the importance of getting kids back in school, and then the workload associated with getting kids back in school safely and the impact that that will have on our staff members' workload and time and stress level. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge that this is not going to be easy for our staff. And so we need to tread carefully here as we think about how to balance all of these factors. I also want to make sure that we're really clear that any situation that involves getting kids and staff back in the building, we can plan really well and really thoroughly, and we can try to reduce risk, but we cannot eliminate it. And I just want to be very clear and upfront and transparent about that. So throughout the plan, we're going to outline three possible scenarios for reopening school: on site, which would be the majority of students returning to school in some capacity; hybrid, in which we would intentionally select groups of students to attend at certain times; and then a fully remote model. At this time, I think that we can do either on site or hybrid to start the school year. But I just want to be clear that for any of those instances, this is not really a return to normal. This is a kind of a complete reinvention of what school looks like for now anyway. So there's a lot of logistical implications to many of the guidelines and recommendations from the various sources. We're going to have to be thinking about the modification of our physical environment. Classrooms will need to be set up differently. Spaces will need to be used differently. The way that we interact with kids, classroom management, instructional practices will need to happen differently. An example of that is we're going to have much less opportunity for movement within classrooms and across classrooms than we have in the past. Routines and procedures at every level are going to be different. Handing in homework is going to look different. Signing up to use the bathroom is going to be different. Hanging up your coat is going to look different. So figuring out new ways of doing just about everything. That's going to take some time because we need our staff to feel prepared to be here and to do this. We're also going to need to think about adjusting our schedule and our school calendar in order to accommodate the new routines and procedures and the changes to our practice. And then some of our guiding documents, policy documents, handbook documents, that type of stuff will need to be modified to reflect what needs to happen now. So again, substantial participation and input from staff are needed to accomplish all of those things. The big understanding here is that this is going to be a fluid and evolving situation. So the school is going to need to be ready for anything, which is a challenging undertaking when you're dealing with 9 grade levels and 400 kids and 80 staff members. We're going to need flexibility and cooperation from everybody in order to make any of these options successful. We're going to need to all be engaging in real clear and timely communication. And we're going to be needing time to be thoroughly prepared, trained in new safety protocols, receiving professional development and new practices. So the areas that the plan addresses are health and safety, the various options for instructional models, what our academic framework will look like in any of those models, how transportation might work, how mental health and wellness will be supported, what communication will look like, and what professional development will be needed. So starting with health and safety, because I know that's very much at the forefront of everybody's minds. In terms of safety practices and precautions that we are proposing for on-site or hybrid models, we would expect that all staff and students would be screened for temperature and symptoms daily. We would want students screened at home first and not sent to school if they had any risk factors or symptoms. And then we would screen again upon arrival. We would have protocols in place if a child or staff member did arrive to school exhibiting symptoms or attesting to risk factors, where they would then not be able to stay. We are going to ask that students and staff wear masks pretty much at all times. There may be instances when 6-foot social distancing can be maintained. My guess is that's not going to be very frequent. So students and staff would wear masks most of the time. Obviously, situations involving eating or drinking, they would be removed. We would build in opportunities for breaks for masks. We would have to be really intentional about teaching mask management, particularly to the little kids. We are really recommending emphasizing hand hygiene. It will be taught, it will be practiced. Soap and water will be made available whenever possible. Hand sanitizer will supplement that. We'll have hand sanitizing stations at each entrance and hallways, each classroom. And then of course, we'll need to develop protocols for responding to symptomatic kids, suspected cases of COVID-19, that type of stuff. Isolation protocols, prompt pickup from parents will need to be something that we can all agree to. And then we'll be limiting access to the building by visitors. So essential visitors and vendors only, and they will also be screened for symptoms and risk factors before they can enter the building. In terms of what we do kind of during the school day, we're trying to keep students in cohorts, so groups of kids that don't mingle with other kids. So there's a couple different options for this, and this was one that we struggled with a bit because there's a little bit of an elevated risk in the one that we went with, but we're trying to meet the needs of the developmental needs of our adolescents or pre-adolescents, as well as the instructional needs. So we're proposing that homerooms would be cohorts in grades K through 5. So those homerooms would stay together, would not mix with other classrooms. We're proposing that grade levels would be cohorts in grades 6 through 8. And that meets the needs of 12 and 13 and almost 14-year-olds to have more variety in their social circle, to have more movement throughout their day, to have increased opportunities for more targeted instruction. So for example, in grades 7 and 8, if we kept homerooms together, it would be very challenging to teach pre-algebra along with general math. And it would be very hard to teach algebra along with 8th grade general math. And then in order to keep those cohorts together and to prevent mingling, most meals would be eaten in the classroom. There may be the possibility that we could do a rotating schedule where some grade levels could visit the cafeteria. I have not gotten to that level of detail on scheduling yet. Recess would need to be happening by cohort rather than, right now we typically do K1, 2, all have recess together. That's not going to happen. So that's going to impact the instructional day because now instead of 4 recesses, we'll be scheduling 20. So that is a big shift in how we've done things. One of the factors one of the things that will factor into how successfully we can do this is how many students choose to participate on site. To keep desks 3 feet apart, that means that most classrooms can only accommodate 12 to 14 desks. If we wanted to keep them 6 feet apart, that means most classrooms can only accommodate 8 to 10 desks. So class sizes are going to need to be small. And then we're going to need to minimize hallway traffic and use of common spaces, so that will factor into things like related arts, where related arts teachers will probably travel to classrooms to provide lessons rather than kids walking to their rooms. Again, there's a possibility, depending on scheduling, that we could create opportunities for certain cohorts to visit certain classrooms once in a while and then have adequate time for cleaning. I do think we could do gym. Obviously, when weather is nice, I think we could do gym outside. I do think we could also use the gymnasium, given that class sizes will be pretty small. In terms of how we set up the environment, to support kids staying 3 to 6 feet apart, we'll have decals or stickers on the floor in hallways and outdoor spaces where kids tend to line up to support that social distancing. We would strongly recommend that building use be restricted by outside groups. There's already going to be a huge demand on our custodial staff. And I think having outside groups would further increase that demand. To minimize exposure to potential germs, we're going to shut down the water bubblers. Water filling station or bottle filling stations would remain. Daily cleaning would increase. Deep cleaning would happen regularly. I'll talk about how we've kind of built in the opportunity for that in a moment. And then we would propose increased use of outdoor spaces for instruction. That, for example, though, is another thing that we would need to really support teachers in, because we don't typically teach outside. So then classroom management looks very different when you're outside than it does inside, as do the types of activities that you do. There's also going to likely need to be a change in some traffic patterns. We're anticipating an increased volume of parent drop-off, which means that we're going to need to be thoughtful about parents not backing up onto Route 4 as they tend to do. So we're looking at changing traffic patterns for arrival and dismissal. And then Mr. Alfred's been charged with the fun task of figuring out how to increase structure of bathroom visits, because that's an area that we really need to maintain social distancing in, but it's a little harder to provide oversight in there. All right, so now if we think about the 3 options, I'll go through what each one would look like and a little bit of the rationale for why we chose that. At this point, I don't have a recommendation for on-site or hybrid. There's a bunch of factors that will assist in that decision-making: the number of students who are going to be participating, the number of staff who are going to be here and feel comfortable being here, whatever local health conditions are, whatever the state orders are, and then our capacity to do this and to do this well and to do this safely. So, and then just to give you, oh, sorry, hold on. So we did send out a survey. I would not say that this is herd data, because parent, as Mr. Runing alluded to in his letter a week or so ago, it's which came first, right? Like, we can't really make a plan until we know who's participating, but people don't really know if they want to participate until they know what the plan is. So it's not hard data. We also noticed that it seems like some families probably responded more than once. So it's still soft data, but overall we got the sense from families that about 45% are in favor of returning full-time, 30% would be more interested in a hybrid, and 24% are interested in remote. And then staff was 32% full-time, 37% hybrid, and 32% remote. So, part of what we need to do next is get firmer numbers for that. So if we were to do an on-site model, the proposal is to do a modified schedule on Monday through Thursday with students attending school from 8:35 to 2:25, and then having a remote day for everybody on Friday. This model assumes that about 15 to 25% of students would choose to be remote all the time. So parents could certainly have that choice, but we would ask them to commit to that for a trimester, as it would be very disruptive to our teaching staff to try to absorb kids who've changed their mind kind of anytime. And then in order to support those kids who are working remotely, we would use some combination of teacher teaming, remote staff, and non-classroom specific teachers. And then we can also supplement that with VLAX that now offers classes for students as young as kindergarten. A little explanation of the shortened day. Some of the safety protocols required will impact teacher preparation time. So for example, one of the things that needs to happen now is, instead of a morning recess, kids need to go directly to classrooms. Teachers contractually are entitled to 25 minutes of preparation time before students arrive. So that would eliminate that. So we're trying to give that time back to them. Students eating in classrooms will probably impact teacher lunch times. There may be ways to reduce that impact using paraprofessional staff, but I can't promise that. And so I'm thinking about their lunchtime as well. And then preparation time will be probably shorter and also less, give them less ability to concentrate, because if Miss Hashem's teaching music in my classroom while I'm trying to plan, that's a challenge, right? And then we're also trying to limit use of the staff room. So it's not like I have someplace quiet to go. So we're trying to give back some of that time. Staff would still arrive by 7:25. They would go through their screening, which should be quick for each individual, but a little bit time consuming for 80+ people. And then they would get that 25 minutes of preparation and their 45 minutes of planning time before kids started arriving to their classrooms at 8:35. I don't think that I could then give them necessarily a full half-hour lunch, but I could probably give them a half hour during the day sometime. Again, still need to figure that out. My point being that I can give them back some of the time by shortening the day. I can't give them back all of the time. And so then Friday becomes an opportunity to return the rest of that time, and then also to give them the time that they'll need for the professional development and planning that the increased demands will require. So on Fridays, that would be a remote day for kids. That would, I think, be a good opportunity for them to either become familiar or stay familiar with the routines and expectations of distance learning in case we have to switch to a remote learning model. I think that would make for an easier transition. And then, teachers would still check in with kids that day. There would be opportunity for consultation between the teachers who are teaching the students physically here and the teachers who are teaching remotely. And then there would be time for professional development, committee meetings, PLCs, that type of stuff. If we were to do a hybrid, we would keep that same schedule of 8:35 to 2:25, but we would do a slightly different schedule. There's a couple different ways to break up groups for hybrid. We have a lot of families who have multiple students across grade levels. And so splitting them by grade level did not seem to be convenient for families because it would create very different schedules for kids in the same family. So our proposal, if we were to do a hybrid, would be to do it by family. Students in the first half of the alphabet, A through K, would come 2 days a week. Then Monday and Tuesday, Wednesday would be the remote day for everybody, so that day we could do a deep clean in between the two groups. And then Thursday, Friday, L through Z would attend school. We do have some families where the siblings have different names. We would certainly take that into account and schedule accordingly so that they were going on the same days. So then Wednesdays in that case would be the day that teachers would check in with kids, plan, collaborate, meetings, professional development. And in this model, some students would still elect to work remotely only. And then if we had to move to remote, we would continue with the 4-to-1 model that we used during distance learning in the spring. The flex day, the one day, that's kind of more independent practice, would depend on what model we were coming out of. So if we were coming out of an on-site model where Friday were that flex day, we would keep that. If we were coming out of a hybrid model where Wednesday was a flex day, we would keep that just for continuity's sake. We have some general parameters for what remote learning would look like, but this is an area where we'd really want to spend some time with staff and also get some greater feedback from parents. We received a lot of feedback. We sent some surveys out in the spring. We received a lot of feedback and suggestions and comments, some of it conflicting. Some parents felt like we offered too much work, and some parents felt like we offered not enough work. Some teachers felt like we had too many expectations. Some teachers felt like we didn't have enough expectations. And so that's, we would like to have the opportunity to work with staff to suss out some of those details and figure out what would we be looking at for the expectations around live instruction. with kids, and what would we be looking at for time and work requirements at each grade level, and what types of instructional activities, and how would we grade students and assess them. In all of those models, knowing that we've had kids out of school for several months, we would have some focus areas for K through 4 that would really focus on math and ELA. So science and social studies could certainly be integrated into those, but the real focus for K through 4 would be math and ELA. And then for 5 through 8, we'd continue to focus on math and ELA, and then alternate instructional days or weeks for science and social studies. We will assess students early in the year, but not too early. I don't want them, to come back and be like, hey, take a test. But early in the year to identify what the learning needs are, increase our use of blended learning throughout the on-site and hybrid models so that we keep that sense of continuity if we have to move to remote. And also, given that the instructional models and the classroom setup will have to look differently, student engagement is a concern that I have, not having the option to work as much in small groups, not having the option to go sit, in flexible seating options or work in the hallway, or go work in a different room all the time. Blended learning, I hope, will provide some additional opportunities for engagement strategies and participation strategies for kids. And then certainly in all 3 models, we will continue to support and increase our emphasis on social emotional learning and a sense of connectedness. In terms of wellness, one of the pieces of feedback that we got from before was that it was hard to sustain that sense of community. And we know that social connections are so important. And so keeping a focus on that sense of community, even if we're in a remote setting, will be really important. But in all of those models, we would make sure that we're providing families with resources and support, that we're creating a learning environment that emphasizes that safety and connectedness, that we're identifying additional layers of support for students, families or staff members who require them, and that we continue to work with local agencies to provide additional services and outreach. Transportation. The state guidelines were wildly vague on what transportation should look like. And I do think that if we're working hard to separate and distance and use mitigation strategies during the school day, that we need to continue to do that in transportation. I've been in touch with the bus company. She's given me a couple seating charts that are in your longer document. Given the number of kids that we have who have siblings in the school and who we know are playing with kids in their neighborhood, I think we can safely do 2 kids per seat, every other seat, keeping those 2 kids either as siblings or kids that we know, are familiar with each other already. That gives us 26 kids per bus. Across 5 buses is 130. Based on the data that we've gotten from families, again, not hard data, that might work. If we had to do 2 runs or have a couple buses go out and make a second trip, that would impact scheduling. That would be challenging. Not impossible, but challenging. Masks would have to be worn at any time getting on the bus, while riding the bus, and getting off. The state guidelines asked that buses have hand sanitizer available. Buses cannot carry hand sanitizer legally because it's flammable. So families would need to be responsible for ensuring hand hygiene prior to boarding, and then we would provide it upon their arrival to school. And I do have, so that's the data for you. So 47% said neither morning or afternoon for the bus. My question is that 47% partly the people that aren't going to be here at all? So this is a little bit fuzzy. I will need to be careful about how we ask this question moving forward. But based on this, it could work that we're only transporting 130 kids on each run. Communication and coordination will be really important. We would obviously need to continue to work with the SAU to make sure that messaging is going out and is consistent and is in multiple formats and easily accessible to all stakeholders. We're going to need to continue to monitor evolving guidance and change and communicate any practices as a result of that. And then to the maximum extent possible, we'll work really hard to provide clear expectations and timelines. Any of these situations it's again going to be something none of us have ever done before. And so sometimes it's hard to anticipate or predict what your expectations are in a situation that is brand new to everybody. But certainly we learned a lot in the spring and can apply some of those lessons. But I just want to put it out there that we can't possibly anticipate every little thing that's going to happen. And then finally, I just wanted to highlight some, this is not an exhaustive list, but some of the training and professional development needs that our staff will need. Certainly, we would also consider specific training for parents and students as well. But here we've listed training and professional development needs. New health and safety protocols, we're literally dealing with people's lives here, right? So people want to feel really prepared and know exactly what it is that they're supposed to do. So this isn't just a quick, like, here, have a checklist. This is what you do now. This is something that we're going to want to spend some time with to train our staff and make sure that they feel comfortable and confident. Blended learning strategies, that's certainly something that we've done some with, but we definitely need more training and support in that. Materials management, having every kid have their own set of stuff, having their belongings coming back and forth from home that need to be separated from their peers' belongings. That might not necessarily be a training per se, but staff would certainly need time to sit with their teams and figure out what those routines and procedures would look like. Social emotional learning and support, knowing that we have kids coming back into a routine after almost 6 months away. Many will be experiencing anxiety, so we're going to need to support our staff in that. New and different instructional strategies and engagement strategies, classroom management strategies, community building, remote assessment practices. How are we going to assess and get baseline data on those kids who are choosing not to come to school or can't come to school? Trauma-informed practices, de-escalation strategy, and then the things that we're required to provide training on by law, suicide prevention, bullying, sexual harassment, mandated reporting, all of those things are going to require some significant time. Some of them can be ongoing on those flex days. Others will really need to be provided upfront so that teachers can start the year. I can't stress enough that our staff will need to feel prepared and to be adequately trained in order to do this successfully. So with that in mind, I would recommend adjusting the school calendar. We are supposed to start school on August 24th, I think, or 25th. I would say with staff, and then the 27th with kids, or the 28th, sorry, I should know that. I would say that we need a significant number of days in order to get all of this training and collaboration and planning done. And I would propose that we start school on September 8th. And in your longer document that you were sent a couple hours ago, I do have a proposed changes to the school calendar. We are at this time now required to have 177 instructional days instead of 180. So that helps a little bit. All right, and with that, I'm done.
Jocelyn,
Okay.
thank you so much. This is like so comprehensive, and I'm just really moved by like how encompassing this is, and we haven't even gotten into the details yet. So first and foremost, just thank you so much for all of this.
You.
Yeah, I completely want to second what Shirley just said. This is, we were joking about taking the week off, and obviously this has been a ridiculous amount of work, and it's very well thought out and organized. So thank you. Do you want to go through and ask questions just as you think of them, or do we want to go back through like slide by slide and ask if there's anything there? How do you guys want to go through this?
I get an idea. How about we take the long document that we got and go page by page with that? Because that's more in detail. I think the PowerPoint encompasses a lot of it, but doesn't get into the weeds. So I think if we take the book and just go page by page with it, and then after that, discuss budget. What is this going to cost? Because there's a lot of budget issues in this document.
Okay. I'm okay with that, except I got the email without not enough time to read through the entire document. I've skimmed through about half of it. But we can do that. Other board members, do you want to go with the email document? Does everybody have that?
Yeah, I have it. I haven't really had a chance to read through a lot of it. I started to, but
Maybe we can do this. If we go through the PowerPoint presentation, as we have questions, maybe we can try to find it in the big document, and then there might be more detail there.
I think that might be easier because there's so much information there. It might just streamline the conversation. And then maybe once we get through the slides, we might go to the document for specific things. Does that work?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. What do you think, Shane?
It's fine. It's just that I'm like super prepared with both. I've read both documents. I got notes everywhere. So either way I could do it. I'll manage.
Okay. All right, let's go along with this presentation we just went through, and then we'll refer back to the document, the larger document from there. So we start getting to some of the details. I guess it was that slide 5 that you're on now.
Yes.
Okay.
So I guess one of the first questions I have around the modification of physical environments, a lot of the lower elementary school rooms only have tables. Are we going to have to invest in desks or separation shields for the tables?
So we have.
I apologize. I haven't had a chance to review the entire document yet. I literally.
That's fine. And that level of detail isn't necessarily in here yet. My facilities crew are still working on figuring out our inventory of desks. We do have some in storage. And then, we can buy more if we need to. That again is one of those things that depends on how many kids we have here. And then we also, given that we're taking some desks out of other classrooms, may be able to just shift things around. Size matters a little bit in particularly the younger grades. But I don't think that the impact of desk purchases will be huge.
Okay, what about the partitions and things like that?
So where kids will be wearing masks, we will have partitions in certain situations. For example, speech and language therapy, reading intervention, where it's really important that mouth movement can be seen. The partitions represent another huge cleaning task, as it really increases the surface area that needs to be wiped down every day. And so that's been our reason for not doing those in a more global way.
Okay. That actually led to sorry if I'm hijacking, but it might be jumping ahead, but do we need to hire additional custodial staff?
Yes. So in the full length document, I do mention that we will need to either hire custodial staff or figure out a way to get a contracted service in. One of the recommendations from the Superintendent's Advisory Committee was to maintain bathrooms 3 times a day or clean bathrooms 3 times a day. We have 18 bathrooms in our building. That alone is a
full-time job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On that, could we just make a budget list? I don't know. I could do it if you want.
There's one in your appendix.
There is, but it doesn't go into additional staff for the janitors.
True.
So I just because Thursday is going to be a public session, and people are going to be asking questions on budgets, on how much this is going to cost. Some people are going to be worried about safety. Some people are going to be worried about money. So if we don't have those numbers yet, is it possible to get those numbers before then?
And work on it.
Okay. I'm not trying to make you do extra, saying, hey, you're not doing anything. I'm just like, it's just crunch time, and we need to be prepared.
Yeah, Shane, that's a good point. Thank you. I have one more question, if it's okay, on the school environment for K through 5, if they're going to be in classroom cohorts. I know that some people are going to choose to learn remotely and not come in. But what is our largest group if how many kids are potentially going to be in one classroom if we go this route?
Right, so fourth grade is our largest class. I think there's 20 or 21 in each room. So again, a successful on-site model would really require a percentage of students to be working remotely in order to be able to fit students here. Otherwise, we would need to go hybrid.
Sorry, they kind of just spurred a question. Sorry, Shane. If say that class has 20 kids show up and we can't socially distance in that room, then that would mean that we need those students, or maybe the whole school, that would automatically make a shift to hybrid because we can't safely be in school.
It would. I mean, I think we could be intentional in our planning and communication. We could, let parents know in this particular grade level, we have too many students. Are there any volunteers who, want to do remote or something? But yeah, I mean, I think in order to maintain 12 to 14 kids in a classroom, we're going to have some kids working remotely.
Okay, so that's our cap. Maybe you said it before and I missed it, but we're aiming really for 12 to 14 kids in each room at the most, and more than that we can't do in person.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
I wonder if we should move on to the next slide, because this one kind of encompasses everything. So if we want to break it up, like I feel like we can spin on the introduction page for a while.
Yeah.
So on that first one, like all staff and students will be screened for temperature and symptoms daily. Wow, that's gonna take a lot of time. I know that I don't remember seeing that exactly in this the state one, and I'm fine with the added precaution. But what do you think that's gonna take?
So what we're planning at this point is for there to be two student screening locations, one in the gym with appropriate floor protection applied. And that would be, we're anticipating that parent drop off in the mornings will increase. So we're going to have parents come up and drop off alongside the gym. Students would need to stay in the car until signaled by a staff member that there was room in the line for screening. We would have 6 stations set up in the gym for screening. And then that should take about a minute a kid to do, a hi, how are you? How are you feeling today? Take your temperature, record the information. In the cafeteria would be where we would screen the students dropped off by buses, and we can fit. So if there's 26 kids on a bus, we can fit those kids in the hallway lined up, socially distanced, waiting to go into the gym and to the cafeteria. 6 additional stations in there. Assuming that we would have about 300 students coming to school every day, 300 divided by 12, we can theoretically do it in 25 minutes. In terms of staff screening, I think that would fall to administrators to do. We would then need to, I think, limit the arrival time for staff. We'd have some very hardworking, industrious staff who like to get here very early in the morning. I don't know that it's realistic for there to be a number of administrators here ready to start screening that early in the morning. And I think there would also be cleaning demands. So we would, figure out a reasonable time for staff to start arriving. And then Mr. Robert, Mr. Alford, Mrs. Sholand, and I would conduct those screenings in the mornings and then screen each other.
So on that, because now I'm thinking like staff versus monitoring hallways, making sure kids are going to the classroom, because they go directly to the classroom and they do not go to, they don't congregate outside. And as they're going to be a teacher in the classroom, now we have additional duties for para staff and some teachers. And so one of the things I saw in the state was to make sure that teachers are not doing double the work. And I think that's more for the hybrid thing, for not, doing, if you're doing hybrid, at school and at remote. I think that was more reference to double the work, but I mean, that's going to be asking a lot more of these teachers in a lot less time frame and to do the curriculum as well. Is that something that's going to break the CBA?
Yes, so certainly there are CBA considerations that will need to be agreed upon with both the teaching staff and the support staff.
The state document does indicate, in fact, that the school district should develop a process for screening staff, students, and visitors daily. I know that there's the various guidance documents. I had looked up that one. And to clarify, that concern about teachers having double duty was really talking about the teaching aspect of it, but you're absolutely right. Duties and other things that come into play to maintain safe supervision and safety of students' health will also require more hands on deck.
In order to support some of this, are we considering some staggered drop-off times? I'm wondering if that would help with some of the flow. If you have the feedback that most people are dropping off and you know you need this time period, you may be able to almost do that from cohorts. I don't know, just something to think about as we're trying to plan. I know there's so many pieces we can get specific about, but I wonder if we can stagger some of those drop-offs that you can maybe get, some of those kids that are going to be together in that same grouping time to get their checks in and that sort of thing.
It's certainly something that we've contemplated, and we have planned some sort of staggered dismissal. But the nature of arrival is a little bit more intermittent versus dismissal, where it's all the kids at once. So I think as long as we have staffing that can support the 12 screening stations, and we have staffing that can support the supervision in the hallways, teachers will be in their classrooms at 8:35. They will have already had their prep time for the day. And then students would be supervised there. So it's certainly something we can consider. I don't think we need to structure it quite so tightly yet, but I could be wrong.
And then, is there anything else on this? One of the things that I'd had some feedback on was the possibility of installing some touchless hand sanitizers on the soap and paper towel dispensers as like touchless devices. I don't know what the costs are on that, but it sounded like possibly a really good idea. I think it was soap and paper towels that were touchless for the bathrooms, and then hand sanitizers that were touchless dispensers in each classroom.
It's entirely possible that we could do that. I did talk about that with the facilities crew. Touchless devices are expensive to purchase and then also to maintain. So that was the concern, just given that there are so many other expenses that we may be looking at.
Okay.
Just want to move on to the next slide.
Yeah, can I just say one thing?
Yeah, please.
For your next packet, you actually do have an intent to negotiate from the teachers union to talk about the change in working conditions brought on by the pandemic. So we'll be bringing that to you next week.
Okay.
I think, Brian, you might have gotten it too, right?
I'll check. I got something. I'll double check.
Yeah, but those are definitely discussions we're going to want to have.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I just ask one more question before we move on to the next slide?
Yeah, of course.
The second to last bullet talks about students who are sick will have to be kept separate. Obviously, as we go into usually the first 3 or 4 weeks of school, we start getting the fall colds, kids are getting sick, staff are getting sick. With COVID, we're going to be extra cautious sending kids and staff home. What is our threshold for staff to student ratio that we have to maintain in order to even operate the building? Have we, based on that 300 number, like?
I don't have a specific ratio at this point. It really depends on the situation. I mean, we certainly have staff that can fill in temporarily. So, I can cover a classroom for a couple hours. Mr. Alford can, Mrs. Sholin can. Certainly if in, past years we've had just during regular cold and flu season, 13 to 16 staff members call out in a given day. That would prohibit us being able to run school.
Right.
So, we do actually we've reached out to our substitute teachers, our guest teachers. Most of them are willing to come back. and help us out. But it does beg the question of, if we have a staff member who contracts an illness that keeps them out for multiple days or weeks, what's the plan for that? Because clearly there, we have an expectation of writing 3 days worth of emergency plans, not 2 weeks.
Right.
And many of our teachers are singletons or content specialists. And so it's hard to absorb that. So that's certainly something that we're thinking about. We're trying to build more of a teaming structure. We're trying to build more digital resources to supplement some of that live and in-person planning. But it's definitely a concern.
So one thing you might want to consider, maybe if we're short personnel for monitoring, maybe at the beginning until we get a good grasp of what, how everything works and timing, is maybe ask the substitute teachers to come in and be part of the monitoring process until we can figure it out.
Okay, that is a great idea.
Yeah, it would be great if we have the funds to be able to have some extra teacher positions for subs. That would sound good, Shane.
Agree with that.
So I got a question on masks. So on this, everybody's breaking up. Can you guys hear me?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
It says cloth mask. So what's the standard? Because I can wear a bandana, or does it have to be a surgical mask? N95. Anybody know what the standard is, or what are we supposed to use?
That's a good question. Oh, go ahead.
3-ply cloth
Okay.
is the standard.
All right.
So-
So if I wear, I know there's so many different things you see out there. I don't know what 3-ply cloth looks like. I mean, I wear.
The blue cloth masks.
Yep.
Those are 3-ply.
So I know that there are people in business of making those funky masks with designs on them and stuff, and some of them are 3-ply. How are we going to set a standard saying it's going to be the blue surgical mask or higher, or because we might not know what type of mask someone's wearing if they're just wearing.
Generally, the homemade mask people tend to make 3-ply also. I don't know if we'll be able to get into the level of mask analysis of is that 3-ply? Does it conform? It seems a little.
If I could jump in just based on what was presented and what I read through, it sounds like there will be some mask at school for students if they come without one. And if our communication home is that we're expecting students to be provided from home with a 3-ply cloth mask or greater, we can just go from there and assume that most of the students will be prepared.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know it seems like we're defeating the purpose of the mask if we're not conforming to the standard.
I agree. Yeah, it should be done well.
That may be something where we want to have an area of flexibility for the K-2, because with some of the sensory issues, we may want to have them wearing something as opposed to nothing if it's a big challenge. So maybe just stipulating, if we have an issue, having some sort of exceptions there for what can be used specifically for those lower grade levels. I think, for the older kids, there's going to be some expectations to deal with some of the discomfort, but I want to make sure that we are getting the most realistic outcome too. Like if we have kids who won't keep them on and there's something that's they will wear, that's going to be better than nothing. I don't know. I'm just thinking it from that sensory, social, emotional piece of those younger students that we may want to look at some of the specifications in that.
So one thing I was thinking about maybe eliminating the fact that we're, trying to someone going around wearing not the proper mask. And I know it's a budget issue, is that the school provides the mask. And that eliminates it all. Here's your surgical 3-ply blue mask. This is it. This is what you're wearing. Unless, for special needs or something like that, where we can, accommodate for that. But that's something we might want to consider. I don't know what the budget cost would be for that. Probably quite expensive. Seeing that these kids probably won't will just throw the mask away when they go home. So I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, they're going to be expected to come into school with a mask before they even walk in the door. So I think the way that this is proposed is they're coming with a mask from home. It makes sense. If it doesn't work, you know, we're going to have to be flexible. We're going to have to figure it out. But I'm personally, I'm comfortable with the way this is presented with, you know, students are expected to wear a cloth mask and they're expected to get on the bus with a cloth mask or get out of their car when they get dropped off with a mask on. So, you know, and then we have some at school for those students who need them. But while we're on this slide, personally, I want to say I like the way that third bullet point is worded. With the students and staff will wear a mask at all times. And then the caveat when 6 foot distance cannot be maintained. Later, I think it's worded kind of a little more loosely. So I prefer this kind of, that's the expectation that when you're in school, you're wearing a mask, except for at a few appropriate times. So thank you. Do you guys want to go on to the next slide or do we have more questions about these bullet points?
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I apologize. I was using earpods earlier, and so I was trying to talk, but the connection, I'm not home. The connection is spotty, so sorry that this takes us back in some ways, but I wanted to ask about process. Because as we're talking about some of these details, like should we have staggered drop-offs, getting more feedback from, you know, the points about getting more feedback from staff, I feel a little lost about like, what's going to happen in the next 2 months? Like, when are we engaging families again? And I apologize if I missed this, but are we going to engage family in the community on these plans? How? Staff, same question. And then in the plan itself, the longer plan that we received, there are parts of it that say that more you know, detailed plans will be developed in these areas. And so I had questions about that, like when will that be developed? Or is this just iterative to the next, you know, to where we are this next week? So if someone could just chime in from the administration or just like, what's the process here in the next 6 weeks with engagement and also development of the details?
Yeah, I think we need to look at this almost from an architectural point of view. So the conceptual phase was the superintendent's advisory committee, right? Trying to come up with a list of activities that we need to engage in, trying to come up with the concepts. Then it goes to the administration and the design phase begins. And this is their draft design phase. With the fact that they've had 9 days since the state guidelines were released, I think it's commendable what they've gotten done so far. But they're going to have to do much more work in a few areas, defining things with the staff that aren't defined to the level of detail that we'll need communication-wise. Also, they're going to have to. Well, my thought is you've given one survey without a plan. Once we come closer to a codified plan, it's time to resurvey the parents and the staff to see how their comfort level is, to see if we have any changes in that data, to see if people are feeling more comfortable or less comfortable. And then to take that information and then really drill down like specific, like, Ms. Rodriguez, is your son coming to school or are we taking the first trimester off? And then starting to build that data set. So there's still a tremendous amount of work to be done at the building level. As far as timeline, I'm going to leave that to Jocelyn. I'm sure, given that the fact that she was able to turn a pretty detailed draft around pretty quickly, I would think that at your next meeting, you're going to have something with even a little more detail. Is that reasonable to say, Jocelyn?
To some extent, at this point, I think we really need some staff input, and we can plan for inviting some staff in over the next 4 to 6 weeks with compensation. We have some funds available that we could use for that. For example, developing a master schedule based on the 835 to 225 day will be really important. Figuring out what those new routines and procedures are, figuring out what lesson plans will look like for teaching little kids mask management and that type of thing. So certainly there's more work for the admin team to do. And then there's additional work for voluntary staff to come in with compensation. And then there are, hopefully those 7 or 8 days at the beginning of the school year when we have everybody on site and can really dig in and get to work.
I really appreciate that, Jocelyn. I think it's so important in these situations to hear that staff voice more towards the beginning, because it's a lot easier to plan together than to go back and try to fix something where input wasn't given. So I think that that's really, really great that that'll be able to happen over the next few weeks. And I hope that that staff will be honest in communicating their concerns and their feelings and what they think will work, and be ready to or be able to, really participate in this sooner than later. I think that's good.
And I really think that when you guys all get together, that you guys are going to come up with an awesome plan, and I'm most likely going to be 100% behind it. And I'm sure most of us are as well. But I got it in my head, so many questions about the budget. And I think a lot of it is once you talk to the staff, the budget will kind of play out with itself. Like I said, we just have to wait until we get more input, until we can make more decisions.
Thanks, Scott, and thanks, Jocelyn. And I applaud what you've been able to accomplish. Is very thorough and very impressive what you accomplished. I only ask it to understand what is happening in the next 5 or 6 weeks.
Right.
And I think similar to Shane's questions around the budget, I keep thinking about our family and community engagement and looking at some of the soft data, that was pointed out to us as soft. How are we, what is our plan to talk to families? And I know that's hard, especially in this socially distanced COVID world, but is it just the public session next week? Is it just the survey that we send out? When? Is it just a survey? I feel uncomfortable with that. It doesn't feel as thorough as it could be. And maybe we can spend some time brainstorming this. It could be something that we come up with, but
if I can weigh in on this to help you. One of the things is that the dynamics have been changing weekly. So for instance, a lot of the detail that we can really dig into will depend on the instructional model that is supported by the board out of the 3. Because each of those, although there's an in-person and a remote, they have much different levels of where teachers need to be in terms of being able to provide really high quality online teaching so that students can learn, and we can have that continuous learning, even if we have to go in and out of models as things progress through the year. So I agree with Mr. Rooning that this is a preliminary draft to get us going, but there is more that we need to know. And one of those is, what will our instructional model be? And then we can really build and get all the detail into that and secure that, and to make sure that students and parents and families feel comfortable about that direction. But we're still, like you said, gathering some of the soft data as a way of seeing where's the climate, at least right now. If the overwhelming majority was leading toward wanting to come back to school, that points us in one direction, say within the next 1 week for planning. But if that was pointing more to, no, we want to hold our children back and do more remote, then we would need to, in the next week, just plan a little bit differently. But we definitely understand this is still that starting point, and we definitely need the engagement of others to fill out the plan.
I think this would be a good opportunity to reiterate to everybody who's in on the call, although we're not having public comment, if you do have comment or advice or feedback, please email the board. We would love to have more of that sooner than later to be able to consider that when we get to next week.
Is this a public document yet? I know it's just a draft, but is that something that,
It is after this meeting.
okay,
Yeah, and to be fair, it is a public document. This is not the version that I would send to parents. I would, once we have a clearer plan
Yep.
in place, I would be very intentional about communicating that clearly and effectively, in probably a slightly different format.
okay,
Do you guys want to go on to the next slide?
sure.
I think we've talked about cohorts a bit before. Does anybody have questions about what's presented here?
Yeah, so breakfast and lunch, in the book, it says, that we encourage kids to bring their own lunch. I understand why. Contractually, with our contract, with Fresher Picks, if that's, I forget their name. Are we gonna be taking a bath with them? Do we still, how's that work?
You would, you are responsible to make up any loss of revenue due to sales.
So we're gonna take a bath. Okay.
Yeah, it's not a huge bath. I think, I mean, I would have to check with Glenn, but I think it was, I want to say, at least in one of the districts, it was like $7,000 or $8,000 from the remote session that we did.
Okay.
So it's not terribly bad. But I also, if I can just circle around, and I'm sorry to do this. I don't want anybody in the board just to think that there was one survey. There was actually an SAU survey. And the reason I'm being choppy is I'm looking for the information. There was an SAU survey that was a little more detailed that we surveyed across the SAU. And one of the reasons that you want a multiply survey to get input is because based on the conditions, I'm trying to get out of here now, I'm sorry. Based on the conditions that are going around us, and how people receive that information actually affects the data. So on 7-9, the data across the SAU, not your school data, I'll just take staff, for instance. I would be comfortably returning to school with full-time reasonable safety precautions in place. That was much higher on the 9th of July than it is today. And so it's important to have those multiple data points as a point of input from the parents to see how attitudes change over time. So I'm going to reiterate the importance of resurveying after the plan is adopted. Because if you notice that there's a significant drop in the people who want to be in school, was that environmental? Was that, media driven? Was that information driven from outside? Or is there something about this plan that has people feeling uncomfortable? So
When was the last time we surveyed parents?
I think your
Over
survey
there.
just ended today.
Yeah.
We had done an end of the year survey that
Yep.
was put out May 23rd, I think, and closed June 12th, I want to say. So that was not, and that also has some questions related to comfort of having their child return. So we have that data also. And we also have it from teachers and the paraprofessionals.
Yeah.
So we could look at triangulating the three to see the movement.
Yeah. And then you had your SAU ended on the 9th of July. And now you have your preliminary data that just came in from this week. So we've surveyed in various formats 3 times in Northwood. So I didn't mean to derail the conversation because that's nothing to do with the slide that we're on, but I wanted to to pull that information out. I'm going to further derail it in a minute. I think we've already got an ad up for an anticipated opening for a custodian because we know we're going to need that. And the administration and I need to work together probably in a 5-minute conversation tomorrow to make recommendations for further staff because I see some other needs. And we'll get back to you about that next Wednesday. Jocelyn, how many custodial staff do you have right now other than your director?
I have 2 full-time, 2 part-time, 3 part-time.
All right, so you have 1, 2, 3.5 positions. Is that correct?
Yep. Yep.
Hold on for a second. So Shane, to answer your question without fringe, for another full-time custodian, you're looking at about 31,000 plus your fringe. So
51,000.
30. Yeah, well, it depends. I mean, you don't know. I got to look at the collective bargaining agreement. Are you going to hire 2 part-times? Are you going to hire 1 full-time? What are you going to do? But just as a ballpark, that's a number to start working with, understanding that it's going to either go on the upside or the downside of that. And then, the other thing I'm concerned about that I'm going to be perfectly honest right now is the load on the nurse.
That was my question.
And do we need to potentially look at hiring an LNA or something to help her out? So those are just things that tuck in the back of your head for now.
That was on my list to ask about, especially
Good.
nurses to get sick. That would be, we need to have.
Well, it's not the even if the nurse doesn't get sick.
Oh yeah.
Just a triage.
The workload. I mean, let's not even talk about triage. Let's just talk about the preventative workload, right?
Right.
The workload in prevention is going to be increased. The workload in communication is going to be increased. If we get a COVID-19 case within the school, the protocols and things that are going to have to be initiated in the contact with the New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services is going to be an increase in time. So, we do need to think about that.
It may be worth considering an LNA and even possibly contract short-term administrative staff to help with the logging of what's going in and out for the nurses.
Right.
Those duties.
Or an LNA can do both. But those are things we need to think about further.
And related to that, for the COVID coordinator on site, is it the nurse or how does that fit into this, this conversation?
I think that's a conversation that Jocelyn, me, Adrian, Kathy, and the nurse need to have. I have my own thoughts on who the COVID coordinator would be. But if I disclose those thoughts to you, I sort of haven't gone through the process I need to go through with them.
Sure thing.
And I don't want to shock somebody about what my idea is either. So
Adrian, it's you.
Another hat.
wow. So, anyway.
I did have another just a suggestion, and I'm like Jessica was saying, like process is a big part of what I've been thinking about. When we were talking about related arts and those being in the classrooms, I wonder if within scheduling there might be a way to give some of those lunch breaks to the teachers if the related arts classes are happening during that mid-day period, even if it can't be the full half hour. Just doesn't.
Yeah, that is certainly the plan. The issue being related arts classes would need to start early in the day. So it would be a half-hour break for every teacher, but not at a typical lunchtime.
That makes sense. I know you guys are thinking about a lot of these same things too, but I'm just trying to like put out whatever comes up just in case. So definitely nothing's like, oh, definitely do this. It's just
Yeah, no, so in my mind, if I'm a classroom teacher who has my class in my room during lunch, then I would also be eating my lunch at that time and then have a half hour at a different time of the day. Could be 9:15, could be 1:15, not a lunchtime, but a break during the day.
Right. Okay, great.
Does anybody else have questions about cohorts or social distancing?
I have a
Okay.
question about the food, just because it's one of the bullets under cohorts. For students who are free and reduced lunch, what's the plan there?
So all lunch processes would just move to more of an online sign up and then delivery to classroom. So there wouldn't be any identification or distinguishing of students who got free and reduced versus students who choose to purchase lunch.
I think more about distribution, not so much identification, but if,
Right, so lunches would be delivered to classrooms for all students who purchase them or who get them free or
Got it.
reduced.
All right, next slide.
Does anybody have questions about this slide or any of the bullet points here?
I really love the increased use of outdoor spaces when possible. I know the noise and the extra stimulation, but I think that's going to be so important for our students and staff to get that fresh air, especially when they can. Even if maybe it has a negative effect on some of the academics, I think it's going to have a big positive effect on the social emotional to do that as much as possible. Obviously, that's not every class every day or even necessarily every week, depending on how we can use them. But I think that's a huge positive that we can take from this is using those spaces more.
Yeah, definitely one of the advantages we're in here is we have a rather large campus given the nature trail and then the ball fields and everything. So that could potentially be very helpful for us. You guys want to move on?
Yes.
I think we discussed a number of these pretty good detail. I did want to ask about the local health conditions. How are we going to monitor and I mean, what are the parameters we're going to look for? Like, what are we, if we see so many cases in Northwood and the surrounding towns, does that automatically mean we're going to just switch to a hybrid or remote learning? Or if you could just talk a little bit more about details around that, I'd appreciate it.
Do you want me to do that, Jocelyn?
Yes, please.
Tired? Fortunately, and Shane can chime in here too, we get the daily report from Bob Young at about 9 o'clock at night, every night. And
Great
that
material.
it's like clockwork too. And that gives us our case count from yesterday across the state, our case count for today across the state, the active cases, the deaths, and then he will detail out for Northwood what's going on in Northwood. Jocelyn gets those reports, correct? Yes.
Yes.
Headmaster gets those reports. I get those reports. Shane gets those reports, and a host of other people. And I know I review them daily, but your COVID-19 coordinator, whoever that might be, needs to be receiving and reviewing those emails daily also. And then if we see a concerning trend, then we need to get together and talk about shifting.
Okay. I would, I appreciate that. I would feel, I'd appreciate also and feel more comfortable if we had, if we determined what the threshold would be ahead of time, just so we all know what to watch for. You know, rather than, well, is this a moment or not? And I don't know where we get guidance on that for sure. I had an article I shared with Jocelyn that had something, I don't know how you know, if we want to go with their protocols or not, but
actually, Brian, your link Brian, your link to that article is broken. So neither
Oh.
Justin and I could read it.
I sent one to Jocelyn as a PDF, but I'll get it to you again. If that would be helpful to you. You know, you got a lot to read and going on. So if it's not helpful, I won't bother. But
No, it's fine.
okay.
And Brian, somewhere in the state one or the school one, there is a section on that where you would, the New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services would give guidance and guidelines to either, recommending closing or going hybrid. That's something that's in that report as well that we all get. Well, some of us get. So I don't think there's a threshold hold. There's this kind of like guidance, and then it's up to the administration and SAU to decide to either jump to hybrid or jump to remote or whatever.
Okay.
That local guidance would also, or that coordination with the coordinator and the state health would also depend on various scenarios that we have. When we think about local health, it's not just our community, but our school local health. I've identified 8 different scenarios where we could have students starting and things change, and so the dynamics can be changed. And we could also similarly take a look at those to determine, to what extent they would impact the greater school, and that can play into the conversation that the coordinator could have with the state in helping to make those determinations. But we are looking at those varying scenarios that might jump us into a remote learning situation.
So another thing too, I read in the state one is that, I mean, it's up to the administration as well to, if there is a certain outbreak, say in the Rockingham County or we're so close to Merrimack County, that, and there's kids getting sick and staff getting sick, that the whole school could go down to a 2-week lockdown, quarantine. So there is all this, it's all in there. It's just all over the place. And there's just guidance. There's no actually threshold.
That's
Yeah,
why I really appreciate on the flex day being able to continue the remote learning and staying on top of that, because it'll have our students and staff prepared if we do have to make those switches on and off. I think that's great.
Right, and also if you look at your New Hampshire state guidelines, it talks about I don't have them in front of me, but it talks about the COVID-19 coordinator working with the Department of Health and Human Services to figure out contact tracing and what recommendations to use.
Right.
To shift to remote and limited situations or expansive situations. So yeah, I don't know if there's an actual threshold that we can determine to do that based on the fact that our departments at the state level don't have those thresholds either. It's a little different in other states. For instance, in Maine, we use a red light, yellow light, green light model to determine, and there's benchmarks within that model to determine green is fully open, 2 is hybrid, and 3 is remote. Green is open, yellow is hybrid, and red is remote. So
yeah, I guess the only reason I brought it up is I'm imagining like in the area, the numbers are going up and we're all getting nervous, and then we have to schedule an emergency board meeting to make a decision to go into fully remote or something. And it would be potentially more streamlined or more helpful for all of us.
Well, if you remember,
if we had, but
if you remember, the last time we went remote, that wasn't a board vote. That was me under Ed 302.2 paragraph G, taking an action to maintain the health and safety of the students.
Okay, so
the good thing is 2 hours later, the governor did the same thing, so I didn't get a lot of pushback.
Right. But no, that makes sense. So because then if we don't hear anything from the governor because we have a local outbreak, and then the superintendent at that point can step in and make that happen. So that makes me feel better.
Yeah, and let me explain that process to you, because it's sort of an interesting process that you probably don't have a lot of experience with. The superintendent is not doing that in isolation. The superintendent is working with area superintendents from the Southeast region. Deep into you figure that happened on a Saturday. I think my call started on Friday evening, went late, started again Saturday morning. So it's that your superintendent has the authority and the responsibility to do that, but your superintendent's also working in concert with other superintendents to try to figure out what's best. And that was pretty helpful to me. And I would hope you would find some solace in that, that they're collaborating.
Does anybody have any more questions on this slide? Okay, let's move along. The data. Yeah. Does anybody have any questions about a modified schedule? I love that we have an option to give parents a choice, and I think that's super important in a time like this, because you have to do what's best for your child and what you feel is best. So that's good. Are there any questions about what's on this slide?
The only thing I would note is, as we get going, we may have to revisit that piece about the drop off and pickup times, just to see what the traffic flow is like. I know we might not know until we get into it if everybody's coming at the same time or different, but that's the one spot that the transportation is going to be tricky. And I think that may be something we need to look at. Even if the instructional time is modified, we may need some different windows for drop off and pickup, and considerations of tardies and things like that.
So now that you mentioned, go ahead, Brad.
You go, Shane. Yeah, that's fine.
It's just about the parent drop off. So according to the plan, they're gonna enter through Bow Lake Road entrance and then exit out with a "Do Not Enter" sign. I think that is extremely dangerous. I spoke to the chief about that about an hour and a half ago. So we might have to just look into that for a different plan. Just to give you a heads up on that.
Shane, I know you can't speak for all of the Northwood police, but do you think they'd be willing to help to work out a plan that would be safe? I mean, obviously the concern is having cars backed up on Route 4, that was kind of a concern before anyway. So
Yeah, so we love being there and we can assist with traffic when we're there. We just don't know when we're gonna get a call. And I wouldn't want to leave the bus monitor, the guy, I forget his name, stuck there, by himself. I just think it'll be very dangerous for him with traffic coming from east and west and trying to get cars 1, 2, 3 at a time, plus buses coming in. It looks like a nightmare.
I wonder if, and again, this is just an idea, it might have been something discussed before, that's not a great idea, but I wonder if only having right turning traffic and maybe working with a business that has a larger parking lot to give a turnaround option farther down would help keep the flow of traffic going one way, and then allowing people who need to turn left to be able to make that right-hand turn and have a designated area they can turn. No?
I love that theory, but yeah, I don't see that happening. I see really pissed off parents.
Yeah, I know. I'm just spewing ideas here,
Yeah, I hear you.
Drop off has been a challenge pre-pandemic over the years.
Yes,
Sure has,
it is.
yeah.
It's a pandemic in itself.
I mean, when I was thinking about it, I thought of it the same way that it was presented here, and people coming in from Bow Street and coming up from below the school for drop off, and having the buses go to the front of the building. But I mean, that has its own problems too. It just, you know, if we're asking most parents that can to be dropping off, then there's going to be a lot on Route 4. You know, there was before. So you got, I mean, it's something to work out, but I think we know kind of what's been presented at least, and we'll see what we have to adjust as we go forward. But
Yeah, so I like, this is very at the beginning phase of it, and I'm sure we're gonna come up with a better plan. And I know Steve Ireland reached out to us years ago when we had a bus issue, and he was willing to do a study, and we never did it, and that was failure on my part for not keeping in touch with him on it. And I'll reach out to him again and see if he's willing to do that. And, you know, one of these days in the next week or so, you know, the chief and I and Steve, hopefully we'll sit down with administration and come up with the best practice, the best plan.
okay, you guys want to move on to the next slide?
Yeah, I was just gonna add, you know, as we look at additional staff needs, we may need to consider additional crossing guards or especially as we're developing these initial traffic patterns and trying to sort them out, we may need to look at hiring details to be able to maintain traffic and safety, at least for the first few weeks while we get this going.
That's expensive.
I know. It's not one that I like for sure because of budget, but I'm just, you know, as far as safety in that Route 4, that really scares me.
Sure.
With putting the burden on more parents driving their kids to school and trying to get out there and stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's just a back burner, add it to the list. Let's, you know, keep thinking about what the needs are. And
Yeah, I agree. I feel like we need to like really just try to get all the options on the table and then work
yeah,
through them. So that's it.
I like this plan a lot as a hybrid model. I think it's well thought out. I think you've considered the needs of the teachers, and as well as separating students thoughtfully. So this hopefully we don't have to go to this model as a requirement, but if we do, I think you know, we'll be ready for it.
Go ahead.
Can I just add a little detail for the teachers who I'm sure are listening and watching and wondering how this fits in with the double duty piece? You know, we are anticipating a teaming approach so that, you know, teachers are, you know, if we have a 2-person team, that one of those teachers is spending the majority of their time planning the in-person instruction, and one of those teachers is spending the majority of their time planning and executing the remote instruction, and then supplementing the supervision of students that aren't in the in-person instructor's room with paraprofessionals, non-classroom specific staff, specialists, related arts teachers that are available, so that we're not, you know, this model is challenging. It would have been, I think, an easier planning load for teachers to separate by grade level so that I, you know, as a first grade teacher, I wouldn't have first graders in my room every single day. But that really impacts families. And so we are trying to be thoughtful and intentional about how we can build in some redundancy and teaming so that the planning for both in-person instruction and remote instruction can happen without feeling like double duty for staff.
I also feel I kind of like this, and I don't know why I'm feeling this way because I still want my kid to go back to school full time. But I would almost like to see this start off with this and know what it's like.
Agree.
And then, and just so we have it underneath our belt and then move on from there and go to full-time learning afterwards.
I'm feeling that way just from like the adjustment period that a lot of our students are going to go through from having so little structure and then going into school with so many new rules to encompass. And with the limited amount of movement, I feel like that might be really hard on some students 4 days a week, you know, so maybe easing in I know we don't want to have to switch back and forth more than we have to, but these are just the positives I'm seeing in this, is that it kind of balances their need to move and get outside and those things with getting some more structure back in the classroom and getting back into what that's going to feel like without it being too rigid.
Could I,
balance.
sorry to jump
no,
in
go
like
ahead.
that. Shirley. I think given what you guys were saying, and I went through the Co-Brown plans, and I think their first, either 4 days or their first 8 days, they're going to do their hybrid model. And that might be something we should consider too, like the first week of school is this hybrid week. Just so, for safety reasons and just to get it established. But I do think, we want to be aiming towards like the green plan or, the fully open plan, as, if we can. But as, Ms. Young presented, if we can't get our numbers low enough in each class anyways, then this is kind of where we need to be. So
This might make a big difference on that transportation piece too.
And also another positive is that we're not going to be playing, if it does come back, sports for a whole month anyways. So that wouldn't be something additional we would have to look into for extra screening from kids being home and then coming in and doing sports. So that's another positive.
So
just to-
one point that I would make is just that I don't believe Co-Brown is planning on providing remote instruction to the half of kids who are not coming each of those 4 days. I also think high school students are probably more able to transition between models easily. So I would suggest, I do support starting with a hybrid model. I do think it would be a heavy load on teachers to have to make a quick transition after just a week to a whole different model. So I would just want to be thoughtful and get some input from them on the length of duration of that.
That's exactly what I was going to say, Jocelyn. I was thinking that it should at least be at the minimum more looking like 3 to 4 weeks, do the first month that way, and then either relax, go back to full if we're able, if things are looking good, we've got all the procedures are in place, kids are learning with all the new protocols and staff are, they've got their feet wet with it, then we can either go whichever way we need to go. But I think it almost has to be a full month of one intentional model and then see where we need to go. And then, within that month, we may need to have to shift based on what's happening across the New Hampshire anyway. So I
Right,
think it's for the longer period.
Yeah, I wanted to sort of jump in with that comment. I think it's really important for the board and the community to understand that given health conditions outside of the school or inside of the school, you could potentially be in one of these models at any point in time during the school year. And I do, after listening to your conversation, I do think, as I look at the plan and think about the teachers and think about the students and think about the parents, it may be wiser to start with a 1 month hybrid model just to work all the kinks out.
Yeah.
A school is a complex organization and a complex structure. And in Jocelyn's introduction, she talked about how we're just going to have to redesign everything that we do. I certainly see the benefit on erring on the side of safety and dealing with reduced numbers to do that. So.
I wanted to circle back just to the piece about the independent learning with Co-Brown, that I think if we have a hybrid model, I think it would be great to try to use some of that idea for our remote days with our middle school age group. I think that they learn a lot in terms of independence and what they're going to expect going into high school with some of the ownership of that during the remote. And so I think with hybrid, maybe this will give us an opportunity to incorporate some of those things that really puts the onus on them to do the communication, submit their work, and do those things with their own initiative. And hopefully that will help at least those grade level teachers with some of that load too.
It may, but we also need to have a system in place to support the students who aren't able to do that.
Yeah.
So let's, if it's okay with you guys, let's make sure we discuss this next week when we take a vote about where we're aiming for at the beginning of the school year. If we're going to do like vote on having a month of hybrid or whatnot, it'll give us time to think about it, but it's certainly an option I think we should consider. But does anybody have questions about how the hybrid model will work?
Nope.
Okay, do you want to move along then?
We're familiar
only
with
thing
this.
Yeah, the only thing I want to say in terms of like a remote model, if we go fully remote, I still think one of the things that was really challenging was obviously the community piece and the social emotional piece. I think it's an advantage to be asynchronous, but I'd like to see actually more synchronous, at least meetings. I mean, hopefully we don't have to start the year this way. Hopefully things don't take a turn for the worse from now until September 8th if we decide that that's going to be our starting date. But you know, if we do go to this route, I think it's super important to still hold classroom meetings regularly, especially with the younger kids. I'm primarily what I'm thinking of through my own children, at least a few times a week to be checking in, and then to be able to get quicker access or easier access with teachers. You know, when we switched really quickly, a lot of teachers were learning, you know, digital platforms and stuff. Hopefully Google Classroom is nothing new to the staff at this point, and we could spend more time with how we structure like the day to be a little bit more inclusive, I think. So
I agree.
And that was feedback we got very strongly from families and also from teachers who, as they built capacity during the few months of remote instruction, increased their use of synchronous instruction in their meetings with students and realized how beneficial it was. So that's certainly something that we'll work with staff to identify specific expectations around in terms of the types of synchronous meetings, instruction, with large groups as well as individuals and small groups.
Thanks. I have one other question actually. It's just like procedural. If we're in a remote learning opportunity, there's been some talk, would teachers still be coming to school and teaching remotely from school, or is that everybody at home, or has that decision not been figured out yet?
I think we would need to have some flexibility there, you know, depending on what the local conditions are. If we're able to move about freely, yes, although I wouldn't want to mandate it, because if we're remote, then chances are our teachers' children are also remote, and they may not have the availability to come to school. Certainly one of the other things we would want to do more of moving into a remote setting is making more physical and paper-based materials available, certainly to our younger students. So access to the building would be important for that.
Okay, yeah.
So I think it would depend on availability in the local conditions. But yes, generally speaking, we would want staff to be in the building so that they could be working together and collaborating and preparing materials in person.
All right, thank you. Does anybody else have questions about remote learning? Okay, let's move along.
I guess on this particular one, the first thing I was thinking of is with the focus on math and ELA. I would hope that maybe the ELA could try to encompass some of their subjects being science and social studies, and using those ELA learning disciplines that they're trying to establish, but have the subject matter focus on some of the science and social studies to get pieces of that in, just as a suggestion. And
That's
Yeah.
certainly, yeah, that's certainly something we hope to do. We just know that our rising first and second graders lost a lot of opportunity for explicit instruction around phonics, phonemic awareness, those really key foundational skills in reading. Those are harder to integrate science and social studies content into. Certainly in third and fourth grade, we also got feedback that, you know, the kids were most engaged when they were exploring science and social studies topics. So I think 3 and 4, that's certainly more feasible.
I think one other area we can do that too is with arts and music. If we can have some collaboration there, you know, music can totally reflect social studies and science, and so can the arts. So that can be a really powerful way to engage them in those topics as well.
Right. I was going to say too, if on the remote day, whether that is hybrid or full remote, like on that Friday, maybe having, you know, a little bit of a science activity or social studies like integrated on the flex day as a special activity. It might, you know, also be a nice activity on those days to, you know, change it up a little bit too.
Okay, any other questions about this slide? I think this is important. Any questions about plans for student staff wellness?
Trying to organize my thought on this. I had it a minute ago. I think whether we're remote, hybrid, or on site, this might apply, but just making sure there's resources for staff when and if they may feel really overwhelmed by dealing with this health issue. If it's on site, it may be, you know, a plan for like if certain staff members really need some intervention or some sort of break, because this is going to be overwhelming for everybody. As prepared as we can get. I just want to make sure we really have those support. We're considering those supports for the staff. I know our staff is always worrying about our children and concerned with their social emotional well-being, and they do a great job of it. So let's make sure that we do what we can to back them up in this too. And have some training in advance to dealing with that. Like not only how students are feeling, but like, okay, if you're feeling uncomfortable in the classroom and things are tense, like what are some ways we're going to deal with these new issues that we're coming up with in terms of staff's own safety and concerns? I know that's vague, but.
That's well taken though, because we don't know how long any of these models would have to play out. And we do want to ensure the sustainability of any of the models that we're working with, and staff health and wellness is key to our students' staff and wellness, because they are, you know, the role models within those classrooms demonstrating how to manage personal hygiene and so forth. So that's absolutely an area that we would want to and will plan to support.
And I totally expect that you guys are already doing that. It's just on the forefront of my mind, so I wanted to highlight it.
No, that's appreciated.
Do we want to move on?
Sure.
I think this is kind of a big what if. I mean, I think a lot of people in the community understand the need for private transportation and have the ability, but obviously not everyone is going to be able to do that. So, you know, what if we have more than 130 students running, or we're going to have to get another bus, we're going to have to make separate runs, how we're going to do that. But I mean, it makes sense what the parameters are and what the plan is. So.
Well, as long as we have a bond, we're good.
You do.
I mean, the issue of multiple runs is not insurmountable. It just will require additional layers of plans and flexibility. But it's something that we could certainly work through if we need to.
We've worked through bus issues for sure.
Well, one question I got on buses, can we get a number from, I don't know if we actually can keep this number, about how many kids took the bus last year compared to 130? Did like 200 people take it, 230? Do we know that number?
Maybe, hold on. Go on to another question while I find it.
I have questions about masks, but I think that's going to be coming up. Maybe it's not just transportation based, but I've heard a lot of concern about support on buses for keeping kids distance, having them actually wear their masks. We all know that that can be an area of low supervision because understandably drivers really need to pay attention to the road. So I look forward to seeing some details on that once we kind of have a better understanding of how many people are utilizing the buses.
Are you like hinting at like a bus monitor or something, or is that what
That's
you're
one
thinking, or-
option. I just know that it's hard to drive a bus and keep kids calm and safely seated as it is. So then enforcing masks and social distancing, I think that's something that there will be questions. I don't know that I have really a solution to provide, but
Sure, no, it's something to be
So
thinking about. So
I think bus monitors is going to be really hard to get. We can't even get bus drivers. So I think one of the thing would be the bus driver monitoring the situation and then telling administration what's going on. Administration looking at the film because it's all filmed. They have security cameras, and then addressing the issue that way. Making sure that, hey, you need to behave when you're sitting in these seats. You can't be jumping over, you can't talk, you can't be touching, definitely can't be spitting, stuff like that. So I think that's probably one way to handle it.
yeah, I suspect too, there's going to be a lot of emphasis on personal responsibility and hygiene, and we're all in this together throughout the school. And I know the PBIS program has focused on bus issues before as well. So that will hopefully just extend to the buses. But yeah, they are, as you said, they are all filmed, and if issues come up, we'll have to deal with them like we always have. So not we, Adrian, will have to deal with them like he always has.
Can I jump in again? Jocelyn, what's the capacity of a big bus?
77.
So last year at the beginning of the school, you had 5 buses and they were very full. Because I'm pulling up an email that talks about that.
So it's upwards of 350 kids then. So.
Right.
We're going hybrid.
I was also wondering, I know we have different expectation contracts and stuff. So for anyone who's riding the bus, maybe there is a student agreement contract that explicitly lays out these expectations that to each child and parent as well, if they sign ahead of time, just to kind of reiterate that, these are policies that have to be strictly adhered to in order for these models to work and for us to be able to do that. I don't know if that's helpful or not. But I know they sign up for the computers and all that other stuff, maybe explicitly, putting it as a part of something they've to sign a contract or whatnot.
that's kind of where I was leaning with the mask discussion too, because I know that's part of Code Brown's initiative has been, just the parent communication about the expectations and that sort of thing. So it may fall in line with our transportation information as well. It might be like your daily school preparedness, the expectations for the bus and the expectations for wearing your masks in school properly and that sort of thing. Maybe that's combined. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
That's probably rewriting the handbook.
Yep. One more thing, unfortunately.
You guys want to move on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly what Shirley was saying.
This,
Clear expectations.
yeah.
I knew I jumped the gun.
Do you want to move on past here? If we're moving the start date for students to September 8th, that would allow for some of this training, professional development to occur prior to students being in school. That's, I think, the plan. Is that correct, Jocelyn?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot to deal with, so.
Mhm.
You guys want any more questions here? Do we want to move along?
That might be the last, wasn't it?
I think so.
Yes.
So
Okay.
I have a question about budget. And I know a lot of it has to do with finally getting input from everybody and coming up with a plan. But I just want to make everybody aware of Appendix 6 in the book on page 36, that a lot of these have to do with a plan. When we come up with a plan that we have to buy, or if we want to buy them ahead of time, just in case we might have to go hybrid or remote. But some of them that are in dire need immediately, that will probably need to be voted on soon so we can order them. Because I'm sure then, like the plexiglass is probably a limited supply of that. I think everybody's ordering those. So I just wanted you guys to be cognizant of that page 36.
Okay.
This is kind of a detailed note, but I've heard some feedback that you really need to order polycarbonate, not plexiglass, based on flammability. So that may be something we want to look at based on cost too.
No, we've gone over that.
Okay.
Right. But I just want to look at your budget page.
Also, I know we can't make a motion or anything like that, but I feel like on some of these things, it comes to school safety, that if we have money in the budget, just go ahead and buy it. And I don't think you need board approval for some of this stuff. Like the plexiglass or the polycarbonate, whatever.
Well, that's good because we already bought some.
Oh, perfect.
There's that.
Perfect. I'm like,
And here, Shane, let me help you out. Really don't need board approval for that because they're going ahead and buying it anyway.
perfect. Buy away, please.
What we will need board approval for, and I'm just trying to get back out of the document so I can see you. I'm sorry. What we will need board approval for is any potential positions that we need to add to the budgets, and Jocelyn will come back to you for those. I also want to remind the board that I know people are worried about the budget, and of course you've known over the years that I always worry about the budget too. But you do have your emergency set aside, and I want to say, is it 220, Brian, or I don't know what we determined last year
For Co-Brown students?
for your 2.5%.
Oh, yeah.
Oh. Yeah. Well, we still have to do our retained fund balance for this year, and usually we do that in August. So.
Yeah, you'll do that when the books close, but that's your retained right. So when you do your retained fund balance, you might want to consider retaining the full 2.5%, because that, if you overexpend your budget, you can get in touch with the Department of Ed and call it an emergency. I think this qualifies as an emergency. It does in my 25 years of experience, and access that money to offset any over expenditure. Not really the preferred way that we want to do this, but at least offers us some comfort in purchasing what we need to purchase to make sure that everybody's safe and the school's open. Also right now at the federal level, you've got the HEROES Act, and there's either 70 or 105 billion, depending on who you talk to and what day it is, for schools in the United States, in addition to the paltry 20,000 that you got in CARES Act funding. So, I mean, there is some small pots of money that we can access if we go over.
Okay.
That's it for me.
No, that's good to think about. It had been on my mind. We also, I mean, for some of these facilities upgrades and things, like we have our reserve fund.
Yep, you have a reserve, and you have one reserve, and you have one reserve that's worded very liberally. So if you had facility needs, you could certainly take a look at that too.
Okay. I know this is, I should have thought of this at some earlier point, but on facilities, we have our air movement units throughout the building. I don't think those are, I don't know, but I don't think those are filtered in any way. Is that something that, and forgive me if it was presented and I missed it, but is that something that one of the subcommittees had looked at, filtration systems?
So we do have air handlers with filters. Those filters are maintained and replaced quarterly. The air handlers and the whole system is inspected every time they're exchanged. We are in the process of scheduling an HVAC tech to come in just to review the specifications of our system with us. And then we're also working with a local business to perform an air quality test, just to make sure that we are meeting standards and specifications.
Great, that's wonderful. Does anybody else have any of these kind of general questions that you've thought of?
I have a question from the longer document about students with disabilities. If others have more general questions.
Nope.
Let's take
Okay.
yours now.
Oh, great. So I don't remember if it was at the last meeting where Nate was, where we talked about the possibility or the process for considering the compensatory education services that students may have missed. And sort of preparing that in advance of the meetings that need to happen in the first 30 days. Has there been any more conversation around that? And related to that, what are your plans for getting those things scheduled early on with students and families?
That's really a question for Mr. Byrne.
Okay.
And he's not here. While we work closely together, we don't work in concert with each other.
Yep.
I'm sure, knowing Nate, that he's got a calendar, that he's worked with Mrs. Brewer, that they've got a calendar that they're creating, that they'll have those meetings and determine those services. But you can certainly ask him that at the next meeting that he's at. I'm sorry, Jessica, I just don't have an answer.
Yeah.
Mr. Byrne and I have talked about not so much the scheduling, but the compensatory options. One option would be that on flex days, students could come in for additional services. So days that they wouldn't normally be here,
Yep.
they could potentially come in tutoring before or after school, or even on a Saturday if we had available and interested staff. Were also options that we discussed. So he and I chatted about that this week and plan to continue to work on providing some options that work for families and for teachers.
Please excuse my ignorance at this question, but is there a way to calculate services that haven't been met? Like with students who have additional, who have IEPs, is it a set number of hours that they're supposed to receive?
So
And
for instance, let's take speech and language. That's always an easy one. In a student's IEP, the team determines that the student gets 1 hour of group speech a week. Those services still happened. It wasn't that we denied those services, but those services may have happened individually for a half an hour instead of an hour, because it would have been hard to get a group together remotely.
Mhm.
So it's a discussion the team needs to have on 70 students roughly in Northwood, as to what they got for services. Do they feel like there's loss because of those, was there a lack of services?
Yep.
And then the team needs to decide that with the parent. The parent's part of that team. And then they need to figure out some sort of plan to give those services if services were missed. So
And that's what's discussed in that meeting that takes place in the
yeah,
first
that's an
30
IEP
days.
meeting. Yes, that's an IEP meeting. Yep. And the reason that it's within the first 30 days, and actually I think it's been extended a bit, but he's going to have to give you the detail on that, is how are you going to determine learning loss on the first day of school? How are you going to do that?
Right.
You've got to have a data collection period with kids to see their skills. and where they're at, and if there's been any regression or loss, and then come up with a plan to deal with that. So that's a legal force from the state to make sure that we're doing that. That's a good thing. And so all of those decisions are made at the team level with the parent. So is there ways to yeah, you can calculate services. You can look at Medicaid service logs. You can look at all sorts of things to say, this is what they got. This is what was written. But the hardest thing is, did they get more instruction in an individual session than they would have in a group? And so where are they at? And so that's what the team needs to decide.
Thanks.
Yep.
Are there any other general questions, guys?
I feel like I have a lot of details floating around, but none of them are like,
I think Nate must be
Send us
watching.
on a tailspin somewhere.
I think Nate must be watching on live stream, because I just got a text that said November 15th.
well, that's good. We know it's working.
I hope that's what he's talking about.
Do you guys want to talk about next week?
I don't think
meeting. Sorry, Mr. Rooney.
I think your scheduled meeting's for 2 weeks out, isn't it?
No, it's
next
I
Thursday.
thought it was the 30th, next Thursday.
Yeah, it's next Thursday.
Next Thursday.
And then we-
not what your did you schedule a special meeting?
yes.
Yeah,
Okay,
we
all right.
intend to.
All right, my confusion.
Okay.
Oh,
Are you?
He just texted back. He goes, "It is," and yes. so that's what the November 5th was. What were you going to ask, Brian?
Do we want to make a plan for next week? I personally have a desire to try to meet in person, and before we take a vote to, approve this plan, or we're going to have to vote on a few other things too. Maybe we could talk about what we need to decide in our public meeting next week, and then we'll figure out how we're going to do it. And things I wrote down, an adjustment to the school calendar. That's a vote we're going to have to take if we're going to start out or in the hybrid model, or a different, model. And then any potential budget items that we know of that we can vote on. Can you guys think of anything else we're going to need to take a vote on
Yep.
next week?
Yeah.
Sure.
Intent to negotiate.
Yep.
Okay.
And Mr. Rooney, does the change to school calendar fall under that, where it's a
Yes.
contractual provision? The development of the calendar?
I think that's a good question for the union leadership. I would think them gaining professional development days would be a non-argument, right?
I just like to avoid grievances. That's all.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, we all do. So, but let me get my notes down for a second. So, cost of custodian, next packet, intent to negotiate, adjustment to calendar.
Additional nursing personnel.
Additional personnel. You also need to vote to approve the overall plan.
Right.
Will we have more data from community, parent, or your staff input on this by then? Jocelyn?
I mean, that's a pretty quick turnaround time to get any real. I mean, we
Feedback.
could do a general, these are the options, and what is your comfort level based on these or something, sure. But detailed input would be difficult in a week.
I'd like to, I mean, what I was hoping the board would want to do would be to publicize the PowerPoint presentation that we got this evening, to share the link to this meeting because it was recorded, and then to put out the school board email address and ask for feedback. we'll talk about that maybe a little bit more if we're going to meet in person and what the requirements are. But I think we should, as much as we can, for safety reasons, solicit electronic input rather than face-to-face input. Though, sure, some people will be there face-to-face, and that's okay. But how does the board feel about that general approach?
I mean, I agree. That's why I made that statement earlier, to like remind people that they can reach out to us that way, especially people who are listening who might have to think, oh, I would like to say this, but I can't right now. It gives them an opportunity to give us that feedback, you know, so that we can consider it before we get to next Thursday. I think the other discussion we need to have though is about, weren't we going to talk about some protocols for public attending or what we can do with that? Or
Yep.
not?
Well, the first thing I think you need to do is determine where your meeting is going to be.
Well, traditionally, we've held them in the library. I know Jessica hasn't been on the board since we've done that. But if there's going to be more people, then we have the potential to use the gym or the cafeteria, I believe.
The gym is not
and-
available.
No
I'm
gym.
so-
Oh, that's
The
right.
gym is not available, sorry.
So
So
the
we will have to-
cafeteria would be the other option. And then there's we discussed last week about the challenge with the acoustics in the cafeteria. So
Yeah, and that's gonna be really tough because I've done their graduations in there and we've used a PA system. But now the PA system is gonna be passed around to person to person to person, and that kind of violates everything that we're trying to
Right
accomplish.
now,
yeah,
So I don't think the cafeteria is out if we can't have like thousands of microphones.
if we're going in the library, and do we have the ability to broadcast to another room if there's an overflow room? Does anybody know?
Steve.
Short answer, yes.
That's the
Gotta
answer I
work
was
out the
hoping you were gonna
particulars.
give.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we're gonna make the assumption that we're in the library, for the sake of the meeting being, you know, the logistics of the meeting, and we'll have the potential for an overflow if we need it. We need to figure out what our protocols would be for people to be in there, and I think they're pretty much in this plan. Visitors to the school are required to wear masks. Visitors to the school are screened upon entry, and I think that would include all of us as school board members who would be visiting the school. And the other one was a social distance of 3 to 6 feet. Was what was spelled out in here, if I remember correctly?
6 feet.
I think for adults, it's 6 feet, not 3.
So here's
Okay.
your other thought. So you're going to broadcast to a different room. How are you going to give those folks access to public comment?
I can say something if you want.
Hey, if you're going to
Yeah, I'd love your input, Steve.
You could basically set up an internal, almost like a Zoom or Google Meet session that would pull the video and the audio to the board.
Okay.
Okay, so
You're going to get all that set up and tested before next Thursday, Steve?
Oh, sure.
Okay, great.
okay,
Yeah, we'll be all right.
cool. I appreciate that. I think I think we need to lead by example here with if we're going to be in the school. So and we need to kind of test out these protocols and see how they work. So
All right.
okay. The other
Is there
thing I
any?
got.
Oh, go ahead. I was just wondering if our administration had any feedback about anything else they'd like to see or would make them feel comfortable with it.
I would like to make sure that the board members and the administration are spaced at 6 feet.
Yeah.
I would like to see the chairs in the audience in the library spaced at 6 feet and the chairs in the overflow spaced at 6 feet. I'm sorry. I would like to see a hand sanitizing station upon entry to each room and possibly the building.
Additional masks.
Jocelyn, do you have, yes, we need extra masks. Jocelyn, do you have the no-touch thermometers yet? Do you have those?
Yes.
And do you have a staff protocol sheet like I have, or do you just want mine? We'll just take the names off and put the board members on it.
That's fine. My only concern is, part of the plan that we're referencing is limiting visitors. Our capacity for screening many people at one time, particularly where we administrators are preparing for the meeting, is limited. So I'm mildly concerned about the logistics of that. That's all.
Well, I will screen the board members. I screen every day anyway, and so do you, so we don't have to worry about ourselves. I mean, Steve, is it possible to broadcast it's possible to live stream it on the SAU website. It's still possible to use Zoom for people to call in, right?
Yes.
And then you'll have an overflow space. So I think what the public needs to understand is that even if they don't come to the meeting, they'll still be able to access it, and they'll still be able to give public comment. And then if we have to use an overflow space, they'll be in there too. I think, I understand the stress of trying to get ready for a meeting and at the same time trying to screen people. But on the other hand, if it's a small group of people, it's a good test, right? It's a good run. Steve?
Someone just mentioned to me, just communicated with me, what if it was nice and we could stay outside? I mean, the people could stay outside in the extra room.
You know what? That's an idea, but here's the thing. What if it isn't?
Yeah, I'm just relaying that. I know.
Yeah.
It'll probably thunderstorm if we try to plan it that way.
No snow.
If we're, so we have, our plan we just discussed, we have staff members who will be screening students upon entry every day. Could we reach out to some of them and compensate them for their time at this meeting and to go through that?
I don't know if they would be comfortable screening adults in the community the same way comfort level. I'm just saying, like, as somebody who works as staff in a school, I personally wouldn't have a lot of comfort with screening possibly that many individuals from the public.
Correct.
Okay.
So we can figure it out. I just want the board to be aware that it's a concern. If we have a big crowd, then we're just, it may delay things, but we can figure it out.
Okay. So basically sounds like we have a plan. I think Stephanie, with our Facebook page, we want to probably get this communication out there, and then is it possible to blast through the Alert Now system, or sorry, whatever it is that we're using now, to our parent email list?
One call.
Or do you think just posting as we traditionally do is probably adequate?
I think if we do a one call, we better communicate the other ways that we have as options, include in that, like, you can email at this to get your public comment in. You can call in too, so that people understand all the options.
And maybe we should back off from the one call. I was just kind of thinking out loud, but I think if we're legally posting as we were supposed to, and then if we do our social media presence that we typically do, I think the word will get out there.
I think the other thing I would just like to comment on for anybody who's listening is that if you, or maybe we should share it this way, but if you have an email that you can we say, like, if people have emails they want to address to us as public comment, if they want them read, can they specify that so that we can read them out loud if they want that? Would that help?
I think that's a good idea. Sure.
And they can specify if they don't want it to, if they just want to give the feedback.
Yeah, if we can get the information about the meeting to me as soon as possible, then I will get it out on the Facebook site. So we just need to agree on the language and get it out there. I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, that's going to be a complicated post. So Steve, I need some sort of document from you tomorrow explaining the process for the overflow room and public access remotely.
Okay.
All right. And then we can get it posted probably Monday.
Yeah, and then with the protocols with masks and hand sanitizer and all that stuff. So
Yeah.
they need to know what they're walking into.
Yeah.
Maybe we should do a separate post before, just like inviting people to send email that we can read at public comment if they don't want to attend in person or can't.
Yeah, I can make the post about the meeting as an event, and then we can do like a separate post with more detail and refer to
Okay.
that, you know, so that we get it out there.
Steph, can I work with you tomorrow on the post?
Sure can.
Look at that, Brian. I got you off the hook.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Okay, are there any other thoughts we should have before we wrap up our work session here?
Yeah, so I have a screening question that should probably be added for visitors, and maybe staff. One that we use mostly in the military because we do travel a lot, but there might someone that might be traveling, especially a visitor. That have you traveled outside of New England or any heavy affected areas in the last 2 weeks? Should be a question that should be on there, because you could be asymptomatic.
I don't know if I can exclude them from a public meeting.
Yeah, I mean, it would be good to know, but exactly that. I mean, what if somebody, the way I look at it is if somebody shows up and demands to come in without following our protocols, that's an indication that the community might, you know, that this plan is going to be really difficult for us. So, I mean, hopefully people are compliant, but if they're not, it's still a public meeting.
Yeah, I mean, that's my issue with meeting in the library in the first place.
Yep.
Well, can we put language on the
I think if-
communication that if you've traveled outside of, you know, these areas or the high COVID areas, that we are highly recommending that you do not attend the in-person meeting, but these are the other ways that you may participate. Highly encouraged, you're still able to, they're going to do what they want to do, but if we word it in such a way, I don't know.
Yeah.
Mr. Ruding, isn't an emergency order of the 14-day quarantine or something? We could look at the emergency orders. I think that might be still in effect, that
I think
you
I
have
think
to
you're
follow
right.
those.
It is, if you
Still have that in my
I
work.
looked at it today, so.
You can't come in if you fall into any of those categories.
So if you said, if you travel outside of New England or any heavily affected COVID areas in the last 14 days and they say yes, then they're in violation of emergency order number, whatever it is, and they can't come in.
Okay.
That's a good
Yeah.
thought, Shane. Thanks for bringing that
Yeah.
up. Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Guys, I am so appreciative of all the work that was on display tonight and before now. This is, I mean, this has been a severe challenge. So great appreciation for what everyone's done here. So thank you. Anybody have anything else, or should we get out of here?
I'm ready to go home.
Okay. Do we need to take a motion to adjourn from a work
I'm
session?
not really sure, but you might as well.
Okay, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second,
Okay, and then I guess Brian is a yes. Shirley,
Yes.
Shane,
Yes.
Jessica,
Yes.
and Stephanie.
yes.
Okay, our work session is wrapped up at 8:51. Thank you, everybody.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Thank you.
Night.
Thank you.
Good night.